Hi, it's Drake again. I just wanted to talk about a couple poets I've been reading recently. One I just discovered in the last 2 days, and one I had in my Amazon cart for over a year now, and I cannot remember how I found him, but the one I've had in over a year is named Eli Siegel or Siegel. He was born in Latvia in 1902, and he moved to the United States in I think 1905. Reading his Wikipedia page because I don't know much about him, but he did, interestingly enough, win a poetry prize. He sent a poem into the National uh, journal of some sort of magazine, and he won the prize. Apparently, there were 4,000 poems entered. And I guess Stephen Vincent Benet had also entered in the contest, and his poem was popular too, King David. But the poem that Eli won with, is called Hot Afternoons Have Been in Montana. And I do really like it. I'm just going to read the first section of it. And just last night I had been reading Walt Whitman, just pretty much random poems I saw in Louisiana live oak growing, and when I saw The Learned Astronomer and other stuff. But this one obviously reminded me of Whitman pretty good, and then I read a couple reviews of it, and apparently other people saw the same thing. But in a poetry collection called Hot Afternoons Have Been in Montana, William Carlos Williams wrote a letter of appreciation that was included in that book. So that gives an idea of how respected this guy was, I guess. So it starts like this. Quiet and green was the grass of the field, the sky was whole in brightness. And oh, a bird was flying high there in the sky, so gently, so carelessly and fairly. Here once Indians shouted in battle, and moaned after it. Here were cries, yells, night, and the moon over these men, and the men making the cries and yells. It was hundreds of years ago, when monks were in Europe, monks in cool, black monasteries, thinking of God, studying Virgil. Monks were in Europe, a land having an ocean, miles of water between it and this land, America, possessing Montana. New York, Vermont, New Mexico, America has two. Indians went through Montana, thinking, feeling, trying pleasurably to live. This land, shone on by the sun now, green, quiet now, was under their feet this time. We live now, and it is hundreds of years after. Montana, thou art, and I say thou art, as once monks said of God, and thought too, thou art. Thou hast Kansas on thy side. Kansas is in the newspapers, talked of by men. Idaho thou hast, and far away Singapore, Alabama, Brazil. That bird over this green, under that sun, God, how sweet and graceful it is. Could we ever do that? Machines that fly are clumsy and ugly. Birds go into the air so softly, so fairly. See its curves, earth? In Montana men eat, and have bodies painting them, because they eat. Kansas with Montana and America has two men pained by their eating. So has England with Westminster Abbey, where poets lie, dead now. Oh, what their poetry can do, what poetry can do. There is the brain of man, a soft, puzzling, weak affair. Lord, the perfect green of this meadow. Look at the pure heat and the light of that big sun, and the cleanness of the sky. This is a rather long poem, but I'll skip to the end. Well, no, I won't skip to the end. I'll let you read it. But It's called Hot Afternoons Have Been in Montana. And in a website about this guy, there was a review by Kenneth Rexroth, who I recently have been reading through my library. There was a collected book of his poems, and it mentioned another poet named Wallace Gould, who actually does have one book on archive.org, I guess, Internet Archive, whatever it's called Children of the Sun. And I was just reading it. I downloaded the PDF, and it is very good too. This always happens to me. It goes like 2 weeks where I just am stagnant, I guess you could say. And then I just do other stuff. But yeah, today I had a long day at work. And then I came home and watched the farewell address by Obama. And it was emotional. But one Rhapsody, he calls it, by Wallace Gould. And interestingly enough, he says there is no dedication or preface, but he does write something, and it's pretty funny. Let me read it. Okay, it says, "Note, I shall write no preface, for understandings which are cultivated are as tiresome as misunderstandings. However, do not call the Rhapsodies poems." That's his note. So I'm going to read one rhapsody called Out of Season, and I think it's meaningful that he called them rhapsodies because they do have like a musical tone to them, just the way he puts them, as if certain lines are melodies and certain lines are rhythms. You'll notice, but John Gould Fletcher, another one of my favorites, also does the same thing with free verse. So this one's called Out of Season. It's on page 58 of the PDF. Children of the Sun. "'Twas at Old Orchard when summer was feeble with motherhood which had been abused, and was sallow and hollow-eyed and weary of bearing children. 'Twas in the careless and hopeless turning of life which man calls August, when the mother was done with cradle songs and crooned old passion songs with a quaking tongue. 'Twas in those days when poor summer was strutting in the rags of old ribaldries. The ocean was a warrior reclining naked and proud of being looked upon by those whose eyes sparkled with mighty lusts, or mighty illusions, or mighty woes, or glimmered with the dreams of them. The warrior was proud of his nakedness, and slumbered unannoyed by the exodus of bundle clouds, which hurried away across the azure plains, even as children going on crusades, unannoyed by the vessels which crawled across his fearful expanse of breasts. Slumbering, the warrior snored. Slumbering, he carelessly acknowledged the tributes from the sun. Slumbering, he seemed to know that across his breasts, around his loins, lulled wind-women, lust-hot, to sigh and tease. Slumbering, he throbbed. There were 2 musicians who wandered about the town and along the beach. There was a man who wore a fancy vest of silk brocade. There was a painted woman wearing many beads. One musician had no arms, and he played a mouth-harp fixed to a rack which was strapped to his shoulders, and one musician sang, and he had arms. For years the man who had arms had wandered in streets, and sung, and sung, and sung, and waited upon the man who had no arms, performing his duties which make men shudder. The dressing, undressing, the washing, the feeding, and other things which make men shudder. There was a reason. Years before, they had started out one Sunday morning for the beach on an excursion. Both had drunk heavily before breakfast, intending to make a day of it. By the time they reached the depot, they were dizzy and silly. There was a big crowd, as usual on excursions. The boys stood by the tracks in order to dive for seats in the smoker. The train was making up. They began fooling. One lurched. The train was passing slowly. The one who lurched dropped under a car in a heap. The other leaped after him, stooped, crawled, pushed him to the other side of the track and beyond it, then drew back. He was too late to save himself, however. The wheels took away his arms at the elbows, even grazing the head. The man whose arms remained was grateful, of course, and swore that he would never forsake the man whose arms had been taken away. He consecrated his life to this duty. So, for years, he had sung in streets with him who had no arms, though he was tired of singing in streets, and of performing duties which make men shudder, the dressing, undressing, the washing, the feeding, and other things which make men shudder. He sang and sang and sang. The man who had arms was singing on the beach. He sang and sang and sang and passed the cap of him who had no arms, while he who had no arms was playing the mouth harp fixed to the rack, and played and played and played. And the man who wore the fancy vest of silk brocade waited beyond the crowd, listening to the songs, and the painted woman wearing many beads waited beyond the crowd, playing with her beads. The name of the man who had no arms was Jimmy. The name of the man possessing arms was Benny. Benny, doing the crowd, passed the cap to the man with the fancy vest. The man spoke to him. "Would you like a regular job?" "What doing?" The singer was disinterested and impatient. "Singing, steady for the winter." The singer turned away. And it continues, but this is just interesting that it's not popular. But one thing about that, I was listening to a talk by, it was between Michael Silverblatt and W.G. Sebald. And Michael Silverblatt said something where he felt that W.G. Sebald had like an urge to listen to the people who are not normally listened to. And W.G. Sebald said he agreed that that is true. And I think, as far as myself, I think I do the same thing, because I've always been interested in like the person in the class who like is not paying attention, or like moves their eyes around a lot or something like that. But I just think it's interesting, and like this YouTube channel sort of does that same thing. The books that aren't read as much. But coincidentally, this Wallace Gould, this book, Children of the Sun, was published in 1917. And then just one last thing I've been reading, try to keep it short, is Seven Greeks by Guy Davenport, the translations by Guy Davenport. Which is Archilochus, Sappho, Alcman, Anacreon, Heraclitus, Diogenes, and Herodotus. I don't know if you say it like that, but there's one I really like of Diogenes. The first translation in it is, "I have come to debase the coinage," which is possibly the most ominous phrase I've ever heard in my life. It's just ridiculous, but I have come to debase the coinage. But I didn't save, like I didn't mark the the ones I really liked, and I didn't memorize them, of Sappho and Archilochus, but I see if it doesn't take me too long to find it. Yeah, and with Obama's farewell address, uh, I like I do hope that Donald Trump does okay, but as far as I can tell, it won't be. And I just feel lucky that I grew up, had my formative years, I guess you could say, with Obama as president. I worry about the kids growing up now with who they have. But yeah, I actually did get a little teary-eyed with the farewell speech when he was talking about his wife and his daughter, and he said, of all the things I've done in my life, I'm most proud of being your dad, talking to his two girls. So, yeah, it's touching. But one I guess, fragment I liked by Archilochus is number 79 in this book. It's called Some Sayan Mountaineer Struts Today with My Shield. I threw it down by a bush and ran when the fighting got hot. Life seemed somehow more precious. It was a beautiful shield. I know where I can buy another, exactly like it, just as round. And then here's something that must be like a dedication, number 76. To make you laugh, Kyrillos, Kyrileos, Erismonides, and best of my friends. Here's a funny story. I heard of Archilochus. The reason I got this book is I was reading The Return by Bolaño, and at the very end, he has a little short story, like 5, 6 pages, that talks about how unforgiving being a young artist is, specifically an author, a writer. And he says he would walk around Spain and Madrid, I think, carrying the poems of Archilochus, who is the first, I guess pretty much the first, like, I guess lyric poet in like Western literature, at least in Greek stuff, back in the 700s BC. Can you believe that? And we can read it. But yeah, the name Guy Davenport got recognition from Paperbird's videos, so thanks for that. And I guess I'll end it here, but never forget the Gospel of Paul. Death is a gang boss.